The grand hall of Vanguard timepieces glittered that evening like a cathedral forged from crystal. Massive chandeliers cascaded light over shimmering gowns and impeccably tailored suits, casting prisms that danced across polished marble floors. The soft clink of champagne flutes provided a rhythmic underscore to the high-stakes drama unfolding among New York's elite, a symphony of wealth and whispered deals. Nia Harper stood behind the guest registration desk, her black blazer fitting her frame with professional precision. Her grandmother's gold hoop earrings caught the light subtly, adding a personal touch to her ensemble. And her natural hair, thick, coily, and unapologetically voluminous, fell freely around her shoulders, untamed by straighteners or products meant to tame it. She had learned long ago to make herself neater. She had heard the suggestions before: it would look more professional if you controlled your hair a bit. But tonight, she refused. Tonight, she was simply herself, unfiltered and unafraid. That resolve held until a soft, mocking laugh drifted from behind her. "Oh, does she think this is a gala or a street festival?" a woman in a cream-white coat murmured, her voice pitched just loud enough for those nearby to catch every syllable. The man accompanying her glanced at Nia's hair and smirked. "I don't know what criteria this high-end boutique uses to hire staff." A few others chuckled softly. Not loudly, but enough to form an invisible barrier, a circle of exclusion drawn in hushed amusement. The woman stepped closer, as if inspecting a display piece in a showroom. "You should know your place. People here prefer elegance." Her eyes scanned from Nia's hair down to her shoes, lingering with deliberate judgment. "Actually, if you straightened it, you might look more fitting." The velvet rope area fell into a familiar hush, not one of shock, but of deliberate detachment. The security guard nearby averted his gaze. A couple of guests pretended to fiddle with their phones. No one intervened. Nia felt the familiar heat rising in her chest. She knew this sensation from age 12, when a classmate said her hair looked unbrushed. From 19, when a manager insisted she tidy up for the brand image. She could smile it off. She could apologize for something unapologetic. She could shrink, as she had so many times before. But tonight, she didn't. Instead, Nia set the guest list down on the desk with measured calm. She stepped over the red velvet rope, standing level with the woman, not defensive, not aggressive, just equal. Her voice was steady, neither raised nor trembling. "I understand." 3 words. No explanations. No defenses. No arguments. Just a statement weighted with the gravity of someone too familiar with being judged. The woman smirked, assuming victory. But at that moment, the stage lights began to dim. The MC ascended the podium. The massive LED screen behind flickered to life. An introductory slide appeared, the special recognition segment of the gala. Nia's heart pounded in her ears. And then, the MC smiled, glancing at the notes in hand. "We'll dedicate the next portion to honoring a woman who has completely transformed Vanguard's operations over the past 2 years." The screen behind started displaying images. The first name appeared slowly. Nia Celeste Harper. The room hadn't reacted yet. But the woman who had mocked her hair had gone pale. And in that instant, the entire hall fell silent. The woman stepped even closer, as if appraising a piece on display in the boutique's showroom. Her presence was invasive, her posture one of entitlement honed over years in circles where judgment was currency. "You should know your place," she said, her tone laced with a faux politeness that barely masked the disdain. "People here appreciate refinement." Her eyes swept from Nia's hair down to her shoes, lingering with slow, deliberate scrutiny, as if cataloging every perceived flaw. "Actually, if you straightened it, you might look more fitting." The velvet rope area fell into a silence that was all too familiar, not the stunned hush of outrage, but the deliberate quiet of bystanders choosing detachment. It wasn't silence born from shock. It was the kind where everyone opted out, preserving their own comfort over intervention. The security guard nearby glanced away, suddenly fascinated by a distant chandelier. A few guests pretended to adjust their phones, their fingers scrolling aimlessly through screens to avoid eye contact. No one spoke up. No one even shifted uncomfortably enough to draw attention. The air thickened with unspoken complicity, a collective decision to let the moment pass without disruption. Nia felt the familiar heat rising beneath her ribcage, a slow burn that started in her chest and spread outward like embers catching wind. She knew this sensation intimately, from age 12, when a classmate had sneered that her hair looked unbrushed, prompting giggles from the group. From 19, when a manager had pulled her aside and suggested she tidy up to better fit the brand's image, his words wrapped in concern but dripping with expectation. She could smile through it, as she had so often before, a polite deflection to smooth the edges. She could apologize for something that required no apology, shrinking herself to make the discomfort hers alone. She could retreat inward, pulling back like she had in countless rooms where her presence was questioned not for her skills, but for her appearance. But tonight, she didn't. Instead, Nia held her ground. The heat in her chest didn't erupt into words or gestures. It fueled a quiet resolve, steadying her stance. She met the woman's gaze without flinching, her expression composed, betraying nothing of the storm inside. In that moment, the silence around her felt heavier than the mockery, a reminder that indifference could wound deeper than outright cruelty. Yet, it also sharpened her clarity. She wouldn't bend. Not here, not now. The woman, sensing no immediate backlash, allowed a faint smile to curve her lips, interpreting the lack of response as submission. But Nia knew better. This wasn't defeat, it was preparation. The gala's energy hummed on, oblivious for the moment, but the shift had begun in her. She straightened her shoulders imperceptibly, her natural coils framing her face like a crown she had no intention of removing. As the MC's voice echoed faintly from the stage, signaling the program's progression, Nia's mind raced through the evening's agenda. She could feel the weight of the upcoming segment, the one where everything would align. But for now, she simply existed in the space, unyielding. The woman's words hung in the air, but they no longer defined it. Nia did. The guard shifted his weight, stealing a glance back. A guest nearby lowered their phone, curiosity flickering in their eyes. The silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken questions. What would happen next? Nia didn't rush to fill it. She let it linger, a testament to her patience. Tonight, the room would learn to adjust, not her. Nia placed the guest list down on the desk with deliberate calm, the soft thud echoing in the charged silence around her. She stepped over the red velvet rope, positioning herself directly across from the woman, not shielding herself, not advancing aggressively, just standing on equal footing, her posture a quiet assertion of presence. Her voice remained even, neither elevated nor quivering. I understand. 3 words. No explanations. No defenses. No arguments. Just a statement carrying the weight of someone far too accustomed to being scrutinized, evaluated, and diminished. It hung in the air like an unspoken challenge, simple yet loaded with the history of every slight she had endured, the playground taunts, the professional suggestions, the subtle exclusions that piled up over years. The woman smirked faintly, interpreting the brevity as concession, as if she had successfully reasserted the invisible hierarchy of the room. Victory gleamed in her eyes, a smug satisfaction that this minor confrontation had ended in her favor, reinforcing the boundaries she so comfortably policed. But at that precise moment, the stage lights began to soften, dimming gradually to draw focus toward the podium. The MC ascended the main platform with poised steps, microphone in hand. The enormous LED screen behind flickered to life, its glow bathing the hall in a soft blue hue. An introductory slide materialized, the special recognition segment of the gala evening. Nia's heart pounded in her chest, a rhythmic drumbeat syncing with the subtle hum of anticipation rippling through the crowd. She could feel the shift, the invisible current pulling the room toward revelation. And then, the MC smiled, glancing down at the notes in hand. "We'll dedicate the next portion to honoring a woman who has completely transformed Vanguard's operations over the past 2 years." The screen behind started displaying images, transitions smooth and deliberate. The first name appeared slowly, letter by letter unfolding across the vast display. Nia Celeste Harper. The room hadn't reacted yet, the realization dawning unevenly among the guests. Whispers stirred faintly, confusion knitting brows as eyes darted between the screen and the woman at the registration desk. But the woman who had mocked her hair had gone pale. Her smirk evaporated, replaced by a flicker of disbelief widening her eyes. The champagne flute in her hand tilted slightly, forgotten, as the implications sank in. And in that instant, the entire hall fell silent. The clinking glasses ceased, conversations halted mid-sentence, and even the distant murmur of the orchestra faded into oblivion. The air grew thick, heavy with the unspoken recalibration of perceptions. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of the moment pressed down, transforming the glittering space from a venue of exclusion to one on the brink of reckoning. Nia stood there, unchanged, her natural coils framing her face under the shifting lights. She didn't need to say more. The screen had spoken for her, and the silence now belonged to those who had judged too hastily. The gala's facade cracked, exposing the fragility of assumptions built on appearances alone. As the MC's voice continued, the room held its breath, waiting for the full unveiling that would redefine everything. The name of Nia had just materialized on the massive screen, glowing in elegant script against the dark backdrop. But the crowd hadn't grasped it yet. Murmurs rippled through the hall like aftershocks, confusion etching lines on faces accustomed to certainty. Guests exchanged glances, some tilting heads toward the podium, others scanning the room as if searching for the honored figure among the elite. The woman in the cream-white coat, Victoria Langford, furrowed her brow, her earlier smirk fading into a mask of skepticism. She leaned toward her companion, her voice a hushed murmur, pitched just loud enough for the cluster nearby to overhear. "Must be a coincidence," she said, her tone laced with dismissal. "Staff here don't get spotlighted like that. No way a registration clerk has that kind of pull." A man nearby chuckled awkwardly, his laugh forced and thin. "Probably logistics or something. They must have mixed up the slides." The MC on stage continued seamlessly, their voice amplified and steady. "Over the past 2 years, she has restructured Vanguard Timepiece's entire international client strategy." Whispers began to spread, a low hum building like static electricity in the air. Heads turned, eyes narrowing as connections flickered in minds. A few guests pulled out phones discreetly, fingers hovering over screens as if to verify the unfolding narrative. Victoria pivoted toward Nia, her gaze shifting from outright contempt to probing scrutiny. The woman's posture had changed subtly, less domineering, more uncertain, as she addressed her directly. "You know anything about this?" Nia didn't respond immediately. She simply stood there, her back straight, her expression serene. Upright and unyielding, her eyes met Victoria's without wavering. No explanations. No denials. Just observation. In that moment, her silence was no longer the quiet of someone cornered or diminished. It was the silence of someone who held knowledge others lacked, a deliberate pause that amplified the tension rather than diffusing it. The air between them thickened, Victoria's confidence cracking under the weight of Nia's unflinching poise. The surrounding guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the imbalance but not yet understanding its source. Nia's natural coils framed her face like a frame of quiet defiance, untouched by the growing unease. The MC's words flowed on, each sentence layering more context, drawing the room inexorably toward revelation. Victoria's hand tightened on her champagne flute, her earlier laughter now a distant echo, swallowed by the dawning realization that the ground beneath her assumptions was shifting. Nia remained still, her calm anchor in the brewing storm, waiting for the truth to unfold on its own terms. Victoria laughed dryly, a brittle sound that echoed faintly in the shifting atmosphere of the hall. Her eyes narrowed, clinging to the remnants of her earlier superiority, unwilling to let the unfolding events erode her stance completely. "Whatever this is," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the screen with a flick of her wrist, "it doesn't change the fact that you should dress to standard. A little more polish wouldn't hurt." Nia met her gaze steadily. Her voice remained soft, measured, carrying no edge of confrontation. "I think you should consider your words." Just that. No threats. No raised tone. But her eyes, steady, unwavering, held a quiet intensity that pierced through the pretense. It was a look that spoke volumes without volume, a calm that unsettled more than any outburst could. Nearby, a staff member swallowed audibly, his throat bobbing as he shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the invisible undercurrent pulling the room in a new direction. The man's discomfort was palpable. He averted his eyes, fiddling with a clipboard as if it could shield him from the tension. Victoria burst into laughter, a sharp, forced bark that rang hollow now. It was meant to reclaim control, to dismiss the subtle warning as inconsequential. "Who do you think you are?" A familiar question. One Nia had heard throughout her life, in boardrooms where her ideas were overlooked, in interviews where her qualifications were questioned, in everyday encounters where her presence alone seemed to provoke scrutiny. It was a query designed to diminish, to remind her of supposed boundaries she wasn't meant to cross. She didn't answer. There was no need. The response was already unfolding behind them, etched in glowing letters on the screen, a silent testament that required no verbal defense. The MC's voice continued to weave through the air, layering details that chipped away at the woman's facade. Victoria's laugh faded, her expression tightening as the whispers around her grew, eyes darting between Nia and the podium. The hall's energy had shifted irrevocably. What was once a circle of amusement now felt like a spotlight turning inward. Nia's silence amplified it all, a deliberate choice that let the truth speak for itself, louder than any retort could. The staff member nearby edged away slightly, sensing the tide turning, while guests murmured, piecing together the puzzle. Victoria's hand trembled faintly on her flute, her confidence fracturing under the weight of her own words echoing back in the new context. Nia stood unmoved, her natural coils a frame of quiet defiance, waiting for the inevitable realization to fully dawn. The MC continued, their voice steady and resonant over the speakers. "She is the one behind the merger with Eastern Harbor Distribution, propelling Vanguard timepieces to the top brand in the region." A new slide materialized on the screen, the transition smooth and illuminating. It featured a photograph of Nia in a boardroom, her natural hair untamed, framing her face without apology. Her eyes were focused intently, her hand resting on a polished walnut table, exuding quiet authority amid stacks of documents and laptops. Text scrolled beneath, Chief Strategy Director, Vanguard Timepieces. Chief Strategy Director. Not a desk clerk. Not someone who didn't belong here. Victoria went pale, the color draining from her cheeks as if an invisible hand had pulled a plug. Her earlier laugh caught in her throat, transforming into a choked silence. The man beside her instinctively stepped back half a pace, his smirk evaporating into wide-eyed uncertainty, his posture shrinking as the implications hit. The security guard who had averted his gaze earlier now turned fully toward Nia, his expression shifting from indifference to recognition, then to a subtle respect. His stance straightened, no longer casual, he nodded faintly, as if recalibrating his role in the unfolding scene. And at that precise moment, the MC's voice rang out clearer, more emphatic, and tonight, she is not just an honored guest. She is the new co-owner of Vanguard Timepieces. The hall fell devoid of laughter. The ambient chatter dissolved into nothingness, leaving only the soft whir of the air conditioning and the faint, erratic thumps of hearts pounding in a few chests, Victoria's among them. Guests who had chuckled moments ago now stared at the floor or their drinks, the collective air thick with discomfort, a palpable recalibration hanging like fog. Nia gently touched her hair, not to adjust it, not out of self-consciousness. Just to affirm something intrinsic, a quiet declaration to herself. She didn't need to alter it. The room itself was the one that had just been forced to adjust, its invisible hierarchies crumbling under the weight of revealed truth. The chandeliers above seemed to dim slightly in deference, their light now highlighting her coils as a symbol of unyielding presence. Whispers started anew, but these were different, odd, questioning, no longer mocking. Victoria's hand trembled on her flute, her world tilting as eyes around her turned not in alliance, but in judgment. Nia remained composed, her silence a bridge to the revelation, letting the facts reshape the space without a single additional word from her. The gala's facade had cracked, and in the breach, authenticity flooded in. The atmosphere in the hall had shifted palpably, a subtle undercurrent of unease rippling through the crowd like a chill draft. Whispers had turned to hesitant glances, and the once comfortable elite now fidgeted with their glasses or ties, sensing the ground beneath their social certainties giving way. But Victoria Langford hadn't conceded yet. Her grip tightened on the champagne flute, knuckles whitening as she fought to maintain her composure amid the growing revelation. Co-owner, she scoffed, her laugh forced and brittle, echoing awkwardly in the now hushed space. Probably just a token shareholder. Every company these days needs a diversity face for the press releases. The words landed on the marble floor like shattered glass, sharp and irretrievable. A few guests averted their eyes, turning away as if the statement carried a contagion they didn't want to catch. Others bowed their heads slightly, staring at the intricate patterns in the stonework, their earlier amusement evaporating into discomfort. No one nodded in agreement anymore, the tide had turned too swiftly, leaving Victoria's allies isolated in their silence. Undeterred, Victoria stepped closer to Nia, invading her space with a deliberate proximity that bordered on aggression. Her voice dropped lower, but it carried the same venomous edge, now laced with desperation. You think a few slides on a screen change anything? In the real rooms of power, things still run the old way. It was no longer mere mockery about Nia's hair. This was a final, frantic attempt to salvage her familiar position, to reassert the invisible barriers that had always protected her worldview. Her eyes bored into Nia's, searching for a crack, a flinch, anything that might restore the hierarchy she clung to. The champagne in her glass trembled slightly, betraying the tremor in her hand, but she held her ground, chin lifted in defiance. Around them, the hall seemed to hold its breath. The MC's voice droned on in the background, layering more details about Nia's accomplishments, each word a hammer strike against Victoria's crumbling facade. Guests who had chuckled earlier now shifted uncomfortably, their alliances fracturing under the weight of the unfolding truth. A woman in a sequined gown whispered to her companion, her tone laced with second-hand embarrassment. The security guard, who had looked away before, now watched with furrowed brows, his stance neutral but alert. Nia remained unmoved, her expression a serene mask that amplified Victoria's isolation. The woman's words hung in the air, exposed and futile, as the room's collective gaze turned inward, questioning not Nia, but the one who had spoken so rashly. Victoria's laugh had died, replaced by a tight-lipped smile that fooled no one. This wasn't mockery anymore, it was a last-ditch defense, crumbling before it could take hold. The gala's glittering veneer had peeled back, revealing the fragility beneath, and Victoria stood at the center of the exposure, her final attack rebounding like an echo in an empty chamber. One of the board members, Mr. Lee, emerged from the VIP row, his steps measured and authoritative, cutting through the thickening tension like a steady current. He was a seasoned executive, his silver hair neatly combed, his suit exuding the quiet power of someone who navigated corporate waters with ease. He glanced first at Nia, his expression one of professional respect, a subtle nod acknowledging her presence before he turned his attention to Victoria. "Mrs. Langford," he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of authority without needing volume, each word deliberate and unhurried. The hall seemed to lean in, the earlier whispers fading as his tone commanded attention. Perhaps you should review the most recent quarterly report. Ms. Harper is not a media face. He paused for a beat, letting the statement settle, his eyes steady on Victoria's increasingly strained features. She is the one who saved Vanguard from bankruptcy last year. The words rippled outward like waves on a still pond, disturbing the fragile surface of the room's composure. Guests who had been frozen in awkward silence now exchanged glances, the revelation spreading in hushed tones. A murmur built gradually, not of mockery, but of dawning realization, soft exclamations and nods as pieces clicked into place. A young attendee nearby, clad in a sharp blazer, leaned toward his companion and whispered just audibly enough for those around to catch, "She's the one behind the Eastern Harbor merger." The comment ignited further ripples, heads turning as more guests pieced together the narrative. Whispers evolved into quiet affirmations. "I heard about that deal, it turned everything around. No wonder the stock rebounded so fast." The air hummed with this new energy, the collective mindset shifting from passive observation to active reevaluation. The security guard who had looked away earlier now stood taller, his posture rigid with newfound alertness. He no longer avoided Nia's gaze, instead, he met it briefly with a flicker of recognition, his expression morphing from detachment to deference. He adjusted his stance, hands clasping behind his back, as if aligning himself with the emerging truth rather than the outdated assumptions. The silence in the room at this point was no longer one of complicity. It had transformed into a pivot, a deliberate redirection. What had been a veil of indifference now lifted, exposing the flaws in the initial judgments. Guests who had chuckled or turned away earlier now shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Victoria and Nia, the balance of power visibly tilting. The chandeliers above seemed to cast a harsher light on Victoria's isolation, while Nia's calm presence grew, unchallenged and affirmed by the unfolding endorsements. Mr. Lee's intervention had cracked the facade wide open, and the room, once a bastion of exclusion, was now recalibrating to accommodate the reality it had overlooked. Victoria went pale but clung to her composure, her voice straining to maintain its earlier edge, now threaded with a hint of uncertainty. I didn't know who you are." Nia regarded her steadily. Not with anger. Not with contempt. Just with absolute clarity, her gaze piercing through the remnants of Victoria's facade without malice or triumph. "I never required you to know who I am." A brief pause, a measured breath. "But you should learn to respect others, before knowing who they are." The words weren't loud. They didn't boom across the hall or demand attention. Yet they halted every lingering sound, the faint clink of a distant glass, the subtle shuffle of feet, the low hum of whispers that had begun to rebuild. The room froze, as if the air itself had thickened, suspending movement and breath in a collective hush. Guests who had been murmuring stopped mid-sentence, their eyes widening as the simplicity of Nia's statement resonated, echoing in the silence like a profound truth laid bare. The MC descended from the stage, their steps purposeful and unhurried, weaving through the parted crowd toward Nia. Without ceremony, they extended the microphone directly to her, a gesture of deference that amplified the shift in the room's dynamics. The device gleamed under the lights, its cord trailing like a lifeline to the podium. Nia didn't rush to take it. She let the moment linger, her hand hovering briefly before accepting. Her eyes swept across the hall, over those who had laughed earlier, their faces now flushed with discomfort, over those who had turned away, their gazes now fixed on her with reluctant admiration, over the silent bystanders, their indifference cracked by the unfolding reality. Her natural hair caught the chandelier's glow, its coils shimmering like a halo, untamed and radiant. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the urge to shrink, to make herself smaller, more palatable, to fit into the confines of the room's expectations. The space that had once felt constricting now expanded around her, bending to accommodate her presence rather than demanding she conform. The room was adjusting itself to fit her. The chandeliers seemed to dim in subtle deference, the marble floors reflecting her unyielding stance. Guests shifted, some standing taller as if inspired, others averting eyes in quiet reflection. Victoria stood isolated, her earlier words now a weight she carried alone, the hall's collective focus realigning not against her, but toward the truth Nia embodied. The silence stretched, pregnant with possibility, as Nia prepared to speak, her composure a beacon in the transformed space. The MC descended from the stage with purposeful strides, navigating the parted crowd toward Nia without hesitation or elaborate ceremony. The microphone was extended directly to her, a seamless transfer that underscored the gravity of the moment, the device's polished surface catching the chandelier's glow as it passed into her hand. The entire Eastern Harbor merger, the MC declared clearly, their voice projecting across the hall with unwavering authority, was designed and negotiated by Ms. Nia Celeste Harper. Without her, Vanguard timepieces wouldn't be standing here tonight. The massive LED screen behind shifted to a new slide, the transition fluid and illuminating. Graphs of exponential growth materialized, lines charting revenue spikes, market share expansions, and strategic milestones. Digital signatures scrolled across the bottom, formal and binding. Images of boardroom sessions followed, high-stakes meetings with global partners, documents spread across expansive tables. Her name appeared at the forefront. Chief Strategy Director. Co-owner. The murmurs that had lingered in the hall vanished entirely, swallowed by a profound stillness. The air grew heavy, the collective breath of the guests held in suspension as realizations cascaded through the room. Eyes widened, postures stiffened, the glittering elite, so accustomed to control, now grappled with the reconfiguration of their perceptions. Those who had chuckled moments earlier now exchanged uneasy glances, their laughter a bitter memory that soured in the silence. A woman in a sequined gown averted her eyes, fiddling with her necklace as if it could distract from her complicity. A man who had smirked shifted his weight, his face flushing with discomfort, suddenly isolated in his earlier amusement. Victoria Langford stood frozen, the champagne flute in her hand trembling subtly, sending faint ripples across the golden liquid. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, she could feel the shift in the gazes around her, not supportive, not conspiratorial. No longer did they align with her, huddling in shared superiority. Instead, they carried discomfort, a subtle judgment turned inward upon her. Whispers, if any, were now directed at her actions, her words replaying in minds as missteps rather than triumphs. Her chin lifted defiantly, but her eyes darted, seeking allies that no longer materialized. The room's energy had realigned, leaving her exposed in the harsh light of retrospect. Nia's presence, once dismissed, now commanded the space. The chandeliers above seemed to focus their brilliance on her, her natural coils catching the light like a crown. The board members nodded in quiet affirmation from the wings, their expressions a mix of pride and resolve. Guests who had turned away earlier now leaned forward, drawn into the narrative they had overlooked. The hall, once a domain of exclusion, had transformed, the lights no longer favored the mockers but illuminated the truth, casting long shadows on those who had judged prematurely. Victoria's hand steadied the glass, but the tremor in her resolve was unmistakable, the facade had cracked, and she stood at its epicenter, the weight of the room's recalibration pressing down. Nia ascended the stage with unhurried grace, her steps echoing softly in the profound hush that had enveloped the hall. She didn't rush to speak, allowing the weight of the moment to settle like a fine mist over the audience. The microphone felt solid in her hand, a conduit for the truth she had carried silently until now. She gazed down at the crowd, the very space where, mere minutes ago, her hair had been fodder for ridicule. Now, under the chandelier's glow, her natural coils shimmered freely, unhidden and unapologetic, framing her face like a declaration of self. "I grew up with this hair," she began, her voice calm and resonant, cutting through the silence without force. "I've tried to make it smaller, straighter, more fitting. A few heads bowed in the audience, eyes dropping to laps or floors as the words landed, stirring discomfort in those who had laughed or looked away. "Tonight, I'm not here to prove my worth," she continued steadily. "I'm here to remind us that no one should have to alter their essence to fit into a room." Her eyes paused briefly on Victoria, lingering just long enough to acknowledge without accusation. Not attacking. Not harsh. Just clear. "Vanguard thrives because of differences," she said, her tone unwavering. "If we don't learn to respect that, we don't deserve the growth it brings." The words hung in the air, simple yet profound, reshaping the room's energy. Guests who had chuckled earlier now sat rigid, their earlier amusement curdling into regret. A woman in the front row shifted uncomfortably, her sequined gown catching the light awkwardly as she avoided Nia's gaze. The man who had smirked leaned back, his face flushed, whispering to no one as the truth permeated the space. Nia's presence on stage was a quiet revolution, no raised voice, no dramatic gestures. Just the unvarnished reality of her journey, laid bare. The board members nodded subtly from the sidelines, their expressions a mix of pride and affirmation. Whispers resumed, but these were different, murmurs of reflection, not mockery. "She's right," someone said softly in the back. "How did we miss that?" Victoria stood isolated, her flute forgotten in her hand, the earlier venom replaced by a dawning isolation. The hall's collective focus had realigned, not through vengeance, but through the undeniable power of authenticity. Nia's coils caught the light again, a symbol of resilience, as the audience absorbed her message. The room, once a bastion of judgment, now bent toward understanding, the truth a gentle force that required no retribution, only acknowledgement. The MC invited the board of directors onto the stage with a sweeping gesture, their voice carrying over the speakers to summon the key figures forward. Mr. Lee approached first, his demeanor composed and respectful, holding a gleaming commemorative plaque in his hands. He extended it to Nia, the polished surface reflecting the chandelier lights as he placed it in her grasp. "On behalf of the company," he said, his tone sincere and amplified for the hall, "we thank you, not just for the strategies, but for transforming the culture of this place." The room rose to its feet. Not out of obligation or pressure from the front rows, but because they recognized they were witnessing a moment irreversible, a pivot in perception that couldn't be undone. Applause built gradually, starting as scattered claps and swelling into a resonant wave, echoing off the marble walls. Guests who had laughed earlier now stood with reluctant vigor, their expressions a mix of awe and introspection. A woman in sequins joined in hesitantly, her earlier amusement replaced by quiet reflection. The man who had smirked clapped mechanically, his face a mask of forced neutrality. Victoria Langford retreated a step, then another, her movements instinctive and faltering. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers, clattering softly against the floor, spilling its contents in a small, unnoticed puddle. She opened her mouth to say something, perhaps a defense, an excuse, but her voice lacked its former authority, emerging as a weak murmur lost in the applause. No one heard her. No one looked her way. Eyes were fixed on the stage, on Nia, as if the room's collective focus had realigned irreversibly. The lights seemed to converge solely on one black woman, her natural hair swaying gently in the subtle breeze from the central air conditioning, its coils catching the glow like threads of defiance woven into the narrative. And in that moment, the entire hall grasped a profound truth: she hadn't triumphed because of titles or slides. She had won from the instant she chose not to diminish herself to appease others' ignorance. The applause crescendoed, not as mere politeness, but as an unspoken acknowledgement. Guests who had turned away now leaned forward, absorbing the shift. The board members flanked her, their presence a silent endorsement. Victoria stood alone in the periphery, her earlier words now a shadow she couldn't escape, the hall's energy flowing past her like a river rerouted. Nia's stance remained unchanged, calm, unyielding, a beacon that had redefined the space without a single act of retaliation. The moment etched itself into memory, a quiet revolution where authenticity prevailed over exclusion. As the applause subsided, fading into a resonant echo that lingered in the grand hall, Nia didn't linger on the stage. She handed the microphone back to the MC with a simple nod, her movements fluid and unpretentious. She acknowledged the board members with a brief, respectful incline of her head, Mr. Lee and the others returning the gesture in silent solidarity, then descended the steps without fanfare. She didn't turn back to survey the crowd. She didn't seek out the eyes of those who had mocked her, like Victoria Langford, who now stood diminished in the periphery. Nia walked away as someone who had never needed to prove anything, her stride confident and unburdened, each step a quiet affirmation of her inherent place in the world. Her natural hair swayed gently with her motion, its coils catching the subtle drafts from the central air conditioning. Untamed, unstraightened, unminimized, it moved freely, a living testament to her refusal to conform. No longer a point of scrutiny, it framed her departure like a banner of quiet victory, shimmering under the receding lights. At the eastern exit, away from the main throng, Mrs. Ryu waited patiently. The elderly woman, a longtime mentor in the industry, stood with poise, her new wristwatch, a Vanguard piece from the latest collection, gleaming as it caught the ambient glow. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, followed Nia's approach with a warmth that spoke of shared history and unspoken pride. Mrs. Ryu spoke softly, her voice carrying a gentle timbre honed by years of guiding young talents through corporate mazes. "You walk like someone who knows she belongs here." Nia smiled, a subtle curve of her lips that held no triumph, only quiet certainty. "I've always belonged. It's just tonight, they finally realized it." The words hung between them, simple yet profound, encapsulating the evening's transformation. Mrs. Ryu nodded, her own silver-streaked hair catching the light in solidarity. Together, they stepped through the exit, the hall's murmurs fading behind them. Outside, the city lights sprawled like a canvas of possibilities, indifferent to the gala's hierarchies. Nia breathed in the cool night air, feeling the weight of the evening lift, not because she had changed, but because the space around her had finally expanded to fit her truth. Her coils bounced lightly as she moved forward, unencumbered, into whatever came next. 3 days later, a video clip from the gala began circulating online, spreading like digital wildfire across social platforms. It wasn't the segment where the MC honored her. It was the moment before, when Victoria Langford commented on her hair, her voice dripping with condescension. And the moment after, when Nia's name appeared on the screen, bold and undeniable. A young staff member had captured it all on his phone, his hand steady despite the tension. He posted it with a simple caption, "I used to stay silent. That night, I learned a lesson. Don't wait to know who someone is before respecting them." The video garnered thousands of views within hours, shares multiplying as users dissected the irony. Comments flooded in, "This is why we need to check our biases," one wrote. "Her grace in that moment? Iconic," another added. The hashtag her hair her power started trending subtly at first, then gaining momentum. It wasn't a noisy movement, no viral challenges or celebrity endorsements. Just small, personal stories, office workers sharing photos of their first day at work with natural curls, students posting about ditching straighteners for campus events, designers recounting boardroom battles where their afros were distracting. Each post a quiet rebellion, a thread weaving together experiences of reclamation. Vanguard timepieces responded swiftly, announcing a new internal program, Belonging Without Permission. Belonging, without needing approval. The initiative included workshops on cultural sensitivity, updated hiring policies prioritizing diversity in all forms, and a fund for employees to attend identity-affirming events. Mr. Lee issued a statement, "We thrive when everyone feels they belong as they are." The program rolled out company-wide, with Nia's story as its cornerstone, inspiring branches from New York to Los Angeles. Online, the clip evolved into a symbol. Women tagged friends, sharing their own before and after tales of embracing their hair in professional spaces. Thanks to her, I showed up to my interview unapologetic, one user posted under the hashtag. The movement grew organically, fostering conversations in corporate chats and coffee breaks, challenging norms one story at a time. Nia watched from afar, her phone buzzing with notifications. She didn't engage publicly. But in private, she smiled, knowing the ripple had begun, not from her words on stage, but from refusing to shrink in the first place. 1 month later, preparations for the following year's gala were underway. In the strategic boardroom, Nia sat at the head of the table. Her natural hair cascaded over her shoulders. Her grandmother's gold hoop earrings gleamed softly. She was discussing the global expansion plan, her voice clear and commanding as she outlined market entries, partnerships, and projections. Charts glowed on the screen behind her, data points illustrating growth trajectories she had architected. No one glanced at her hair anymore. They focused on the plans. On the vision. On the precision in her delivery. As the meeting wrapped, a new employee lingered by the door, a young woman with her own coils pulled into a neat bun, her expression tentative yet inspired. "Ms. Harper. I wanted to say, because of you, I didn't straighten my hair for my interview today." Nia looked at the young woman. No lecture. No speech. Just a smile. "Keep it that way. The room will learn to adapt." She rose, walking toward the large glass doors overlooking the city. The afternoon light reflected off her hair, unedited, unminimized. She hadn't won because a big screen announced her name. She had won from the moment she decided not to hide herself. And this time, the entire room had learned that lesson.